Okay, welcome to episode 2 of my Cosmonaut developer commentary. In this episode, I'll be going over the chapter Waste Management, which was initially made in May of 2018 and redone in November of 2018 for the full release of Cosmonaut. So, we start off this chapter just coming away from a chase sequence. I went over this a bit at the end of last episode, but this drop is basically to separate the player from the Metro cops so they feel a bit more relaxed going into this next area, because now we've had the introduction, we're now getting into the main gameplay, but a lot of this chapter is going to be teaching the player about the different enemies, the different weapons, and I'll go over all that. Immediately I wanted something slightly unconventional or slightly different to see rather than just normal gameplay, so I started it off with this kind of scripted sequence, or it's kind of, all it is an NPC on the other side of the window. What's she doing there? I have no idea. I kind of just wanted something a bit weird and interesting for the player to see, and you know, there's no story behind it, there was no thought behind it, I just placed the NPC there. So, and the light obviously draws the player's attention as soon as they get in, because I want the player to notice that and to see that and for it to be part of the atmosphere. So, of course, there is the door here, which the player will see, because the door is kind of, again, right in front of them as they come through, here, this passageway. And I've blocked it up with a crate initially, so the player kind of doesn't acknowledge it straight away in their mind, but obviously they'll see it, they'll go over it. Now, this section is the teaching mechanic for the crowbar. Now, I said in the last episode that even if 99% of the players who play your mod have played Half-Life 2 and the episodes, you still need to teach the mechanics, especially in a big mod like this. This is all part of that, and it's not very... You don't have to do a lot to get the crowbar, but it's been made so that it's interesting. I tried to make it as interesting as possible, which is why we've got this set sequence. I mean, if the crowbar was just down there, the player would just go over, pick it up, hit the board, so that would be it done. That's not very interesting, that's not very memorable either. You want to be making, getting the weapons memorable, and that's something I've not done for every single weapon throughout this mod, but I think with the crowbar I did it very well so that it's very memorable. And yeah, I'll talk a bit more about that when we get in there. Just a side note, I placed this crate blocking the door so the player just doesn't notice it when they come in, so they can definitely notice this. They notice that, oh, we can get around there, and then they think, well, I need something to break that. And obviously if they've played Half-Life 2 they know it's the crowbar. This board, I guess these two boards, but mainly this board, serves two purposes. First purpose is the player has to duck to get under it. I kind of like to add in these things where instead of just running down a corridor like this, I mean, that's fine most of the time, but it's always good to kind of break up the flow so the player has to think, oh, I can't just run through there, I've actually got to duck, or in some cases there'll be places where the player has to jump. It just gives the player another way of interacting with your, the level that you designed, and it's a lot more interesting. The second purpose is part of the teaching mechanic, similar to that one, but I'll talk a bit about that when we come back out this room. So, this room was designed specifically to give the player the crowbar. So, I've put this man, in the middle of the floor. There's nothing... not very much surrounding him. I've tried to make it as obvious as possible that, that's the crowbar with the light, everything like that. And this is an interesting way, so people are going to remember this. Some people have said, oh, it was quite funny how to get the crowbar you had to take it out the guy's hand and stuff like that. And it is kind of a bit brutal, but that's why it was done for the teaching mechanic. I don't know what happened here in terms of the world. I think I put this mask here to kind of let the player's imagination run wild, and you can jump to conclusions yourself, but as the designer of this, I have no idea what happened. I don't know why he's got a crowbar in his hand. it's up to you to decide or jump to conclusions, and he's not doing very well. And then the player's going to pick it up, and it annoys me that his leg goes into the floor. It's just the way the script is, and it's a bit annoying, but it happens. And then that to the player could be quite shocking. It's like, oh, I've got the crowbar, but it was at a price, or it was at a certain cost of the man's life. It's all a bit scary and brutal. Initially, the guy was in the vent. He was actually already gone to begin with, and he was holding the crowbar, but it was difficult to get the crowbar to stay where I wanted it hanging, so the player had to kind of reach up and get it. So I moved the vent over and had this, which I really like the way it turned out. In fact, I like this whole section. And then on the way back to get the door over there, I've given the player an opportunity to put this crowbar to the test. So if the player wants to hit this board and break it, they can. If they want to duck under it, that's fine as well. But now the player is faced with a kind of training board. I've given them 2 just because I thought, well, if they want to try it, they can. Obviously, most players will probably duck or hit the first board and move through. But that's just something, giving the player as much opportunity to test it out, because they'll be breaking stuff with crowbar quite a bit. So now we'll go in here. So I wanted some sense of urgency with this sequence. So now the cops are coming, and they're going to hit her. And this just goes on because I presumed that the player was going to be very rushed to get through, and they want to save her instead of see her die here. But some people just sat and watched. So as soon as you get through the door, the NPC gets taken out. Just, again, it's a very Half-Life inspired thing. If you think back to the original Half-Life, there was all these scientists who were in trouble. There was, I think, one hanging from the elevator in an office complex, and he's like, help, help. And then once you get to the top, he falls down. That was what inspired that sequence there. And, just to keep in line with kind of Half-Life, I mean, there's very few things in this mod that keep in line with Half-Life, but that was just something I borrowed. So this underground area was initially supposed to be a underground market. So there's like neon lights at the side. I had like a shop here, and there was going to be a window here, and the shop was going to be here. But it didn't really make sense in terms of the context of the level, because it's a very sewer-orientated level in sewer style of environments, if you know what I mean. So having an underground market didn't make sense, so I kind of stripped a lot of it out, and now it's just a normal, pretty strange looking corridor. So we've got the crowbar. Now this next section is going to be teaching the player about the barnacle, and I'll just let this play out first. I added that thing in just to make it interesting. It actually stops after a while. Anyway. So yeah, I'll go back and talk over this section here. So when you come into this room, I've placed a lot of the fences and a lot of crates in the way of the player, because the more items you have in front of the player, the more, I guess, brain power the player has to use, or the more the player has to think about it. So if this was a clear corridor, the player wouldn't give a second thought, they'd just run down it. But the fact they've put all these things in the way, the player's going to walk through and think, oh, there's stuff there. These props are going to register in the player's mind, and that's going to take a bit of time. And then, there's many ways around them. So obviously for the fences, they've got to go around, but for the crates, they can break them. They can do what I did before and jump over them. either way, they're going to have to somehow deal with getting past the crates. And then I put them there to slow the player down so they saw this. So they could see that the barnacle's picking up the guy, and this is what the barnacle does. It's just teaching the player what the barnacle does, and obviously they're going to come across barnacles later on in this level, and that's all it was. It was just a way of training the player, and the player can test it for themselves. So this room, the exit to this room is really, really obvious. I tried to make it like unmissable. You can clearly see it, and this is one of these very simplistic rooms that doesn't take a lot of thinking, but it's still, the player still has to think to get past it. So they see the catwalk, the walkway up there, and then they've got to think, well, how do I get up there? And then they kind of do, you know, this circular motion where they're looking for the way, and then they see the way. Hopefully the ladder's clear. I don't know if I've made it as clear as it could be. And instead of them just walking over here, I just made it so the player had to jump. Again, as the interaction thing that I spoke about before, you know, instead of ducking, here you've got to jump instead of just walking over. It just makes it a bit more interesting, so the player should never just be running outright for too long. And there's not an exact time. It's just you just got to use your intuition. Right. Now I don't know if you heard there, but you heard kind of a creaking sound, and I had that creaking sound in there to draw the player's attention to these wooden supports. I'll touch on that later, but this room is the generator puzzle that was in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut. But when I put it in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut, I designed the room, and then I shoehorned the generator puzzle into that room. I kind of just put it in there. It was a bit messy. It didn't really look that good. It didn't play as well as it could. So what I did with this is I designed the puzzle first. So the puzzle was completely designed. This room was designed around this puzzle. And I've spoken about it before, but that's how you should do your puzzles, like your main puzzles, the ones where you've properly got to think about things. You've got to design the puzzle, and then you design the environment and the room around it. So with this, I wanted a few things to be clear. The first thing I wanted to be clear was the generator, and obviously because it's in the middle of the room and it's yellow, it's already quite clear. I've also got this light that shines upon it that also acts as a visual aid later on, so it actually doubles up, and that's a good multi-use for it. I've also got the combined force field, the combined shield, whatever you want to call it, with a wire kind of linking the generator and the light. So when you enter this room, you see each component of the puzzle. You see generator, the wooden planks, and the force field. And that's kind of it. I've shown you the tools for solving the puzzle. Now it's up to you as the player to solve the puzzle. Now, this is where the thing that I've been teaching for the past wee while in the map comes into good use to solve a puzzle. Instead of it just being obligation, of course we've got to break the wooden planks. Now it's, oh, how do I do this? Oh, I see that there's the wooden planks, and then the sound cue obviously just helps the player to understand that. So there's a few things that happen when I hit this. There's going to be a few things happening, so I'll try and cover them all. So as you saw there, first off, the lights went out to kind of show that the generator's now lost power. It's now no longer powering. Obviously the sound goes off, and I had a sound coming from the force field just to alert the player to the fact that something has happened. It's always good to use sound cues, and I've spoken about it before. It's good to kind of draw the player's attention. So if the player was looking this way, or the player was looking elsewhere, they can still hear that something's happened, and now they can see. I put this ladder here so the player could easily get back up. The player can kind of go up here, but I put the white paint behind it because it's actually quite difficult to see against this wall, and some players may be like looking about. I also deliberately placed it where the door is, so when the player comes in they can also kind of see that ladder, just to make it very coherent with the room and the way the room is going. One mistake I made very early on is I put another wire onto this, you know, over to this electric box, and a few playtesters thought that they had opened this door, so they were like standing here for ages trying to open it. So I had to take that wire out, so now it's definitely clear that the generator has no connection to this. This is something completely different, and I do admit it does look a bit like this room is something it's not. It's just a kind of side room, because I knew that someone would complain that, oh, how did the generator get into this room? So I had to have like this roll up door to kind of justify that. So that's why the room itself doesn't make much sense, but the fact is the puzzle's fun, and people really like this puzzle, so it's good to have it in. So there we go. Moving on, this is very much downtime. This bit's just getting you onto the next section. I think I'd planned a few things, but I never implemented them. And this room becomes useful much later on, when you're going to do the next combat encounter. You can kind of cower away in this room. This light was initially red, but I got told that players associate red with it not working, although personally I have nothing on buttons that don't work, but then I see the point, so I kind of made it green. So immediately you get the sound cue to show that there's something going on in here, the Overwatch sound cue. And you see that the player can hide if they so wish. When the doors open, you hear the sound cue, as I said. You also get the Combine or the Metro Cop with the baton run at you first, and it actually gives you a lot of time to deal with him. So then, once you've got rid of him, you can deal with the guy with the gun. Because I thought about having the gun guy shoot first, but then having two of them, especially with one running up to you and the guy shooting you, it's quite overwhelming. So the player gets given time to deal with the easy one first, so then they can focus all their attention on the one with the pistol. And this is one of these examples that I mentioned, that it's not a very interesting way of giving this weapon. I could have done it a lot better, and if I was to do it again, I'd probably find some other way instead of just getting rid of a Metro Cop. So this room is repurposed from NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut, and you can tell that by this pipe that just ends. No one's actually noticed that, or at least no one said anything about it, but this is where the generator puzzle used to be. And when you walk into this area, the Cosmonaut theme track plays, and this creates some context for the end goal of the mod, something you're striving towards.
All teams respond to code 3. Investigate and report. High priority region.
And that was to, that Overwatch voice line was to show that the Combine are heading towards this rocket. They want to investigate this rocket. This is where, the story lies. It all lies on these screens. And I put these screens throughout the mod so that when the player sees it, they're like, we need to get there. Now, how does the player know where to go? Like, in this world space and these levels, how would the Cosmonaut character know? I don't know. It's just a way of creating some context throughout this mod to kind of add in the Cosmonaut story arc. So again, I'm not a writer, and I'll say this, you'll hear me say that over and over again, but for this mod, this is what was done to create context. initially in this, the gated prison, I guess, there was actually one of these tanks that you get in Ravenholm where you can turn it and then set the place on fire, and there were 2 citizens in here, and you as a player got the chance to either set them on fire or release them, so there was a lock on the door that you could shoot and then open. It got a bit very complex because I wanted the player to focus on these screens, so I took it out and just replaced them with these guys, but I quite liked the idea, and it's something I might explore in the future. So moving on, I put in these pistols just in case the player never got the one from that Metro Cop. So the player's always going to get a gun in this room unless they miss that as well. And this is just an example of me keeping combat at quite a distance. So when I say at a distance, I'm not speaking about like a long way away in the distance where you can barely see them. I mean just making sure that these Metro Cops don't run towards you and don't like make it here. In this scenario, obviously back there, the guy had the baton. That was appropriate. But when they've got a gun, you want to be keeping them at a distance. So here they could go in here, they could... the player could go back into this room if they so wished. And this next part's going to be fun and easy combat. And this is what it was like in the canals and sewer section of Half-Life 2 in, I think it's the third chapter, in the sewers. The combat's not supposed to be difficult. The combat's supposed to be fun and easy, and that's what I've done here as well. So I think that's why this pistol's very overpowered, because instead of only kind of nerfing the Metro Cops, because there is like this simple cops setting that you can check in Hammer that gives them, I think, 25 HP. They also made the pistol overpowered for the start of the game. So yeah, at the moment, all the combat's going to be fun and easy. So, coming into this room, the player's already facing that way. I think the gate used to be at this side. I can't remember if it was before I released NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut or before it was released or after, but I switched these 2 around so the player enters this way so they can see up player basically, and they can get a sense of scale. These pipes are a bit strange. It's like, well, what's supporting them from falling? Nothing. I just put them like that, and it would be very obstructive if I tried to somehow bind them to the ceiling. But it's fairly easy for the player to climb up, and I also added in, on the request of some testers, some goodies to find them. There's stuff like that all over this map and the next map. And the issue with that is, there's a lot of ammo, but not everyone finds these areas. Like, I've still been getting comments saying, oh, there's not enough ammo because you can't reach certain Metro Cops, and that's true, but these players aren't finding these secret areas. And, balancing's probably the thing I find most difficult, because I don't know what people are finding and what people aren't finding. Someone might just not be looking hard enough, in which case, it's as the designer, it's not my fault. And I'm not saying that in the sense of trying to remove blame from myself. Obviously, there are cases in which I haven't put enough or have put too much in, which is why I struggle with it so much. The sound cue is to alert the player to that, basically, and that's to alert the player to them. Okay, hopefully you can remember what I did there, because I'm now going to explain it, because I didn't want to be fighting and talking, especially with the music. So coming into this area, and I think I said it said this in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut. I've put these items here to block the player from running straight down the canal or the sewer, I don't know what it is. Just so the player stops, and I've kind of... It's a good thing the sun angle shines on this, because I deliberately placed the barrel there to come down so the player can easily see it. That's where their attention is drawn instantly when the player looks up, and there was something there before that I took out and added in the barrel, and then the attack starts. So to make this combat fun and exciting and easy, I put a lot of exploding barrels, these platforms where the player can shoot and the Metrocops can fall, and you know they've got the pistol. It's all quite exciting and fun. The barnacles are here. They were here in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut, but I hadn't taught them properly. But now with the the guy back there, I have taught them properly, and now the player knows exactly what to expect. And here's one of the first crates, so I put a hint at the side of the screen. Wow, there's a lot of Overwatch noises. Coming down into this room, I made it really difficult to navigate this area just for interest, so the player wasn't bored navigating it, or it wasn't just like run straight forward. So to do that, first off, I blocked this side of the passageway, which is just a clear run. You can just see that, you can just run down there. I blocked it with crates, so a lot of players will be, in their subconscious, they will go to the right, just because these crates are there. They won't give a second thought, or they won't try and break them, they'll move this way, and then I've blocked this area with a fence, which you definitely can't move through. So it's kind of like going in and out, and then here, I did the same with the crates here. So, you can move through here, you can move through there. Either way, you make it to this section of the sewer. Now, interestingly enough, this room was initially designed as a crypt, where you'd find it under a church and there'd be dead people in it. Not, a crypt with skeletons and graves and stuff like that. And one of the things that, after I'd made it, I thought, well, everyone's going to be like, why is there a graveyard crypt in the middle of a sewer area of a metropolitan city? And after thinking that, I changed it to just a generic room. And that's why these torches are here. I thought, if there's one thing I want to keep from the crypt, it is the torches. And this concept was always going to happen. It was just in a different environment. So when you get to this door, when a player gets to any door that they can open, they expect to be able to push the use button, the door's going to open and the player's going to walk through it. That's their expectation. But this was my way of introducing the man hacks. It was that they're going to get to this door, they're going to open the door, and there's going to be something a bit different behind it. So that's why I added in the cops. So it obviously opens towards us because it's been blocked up and the player's looking through and like, what's going on there? And then if the player was to turn around, the guys have gone. Well, she's still on the script. I guess so. So yeah, that was a way of an interesting way of introducing the man hacks, is the fact that you're looking here, the guy's just moved in front and he's like, stay where you are, and then the explosion happens and then you're suddenly in this battle with these man hacks that came from nowhere. I just wanted them to come in, and it also creates a passageway where they exploded the wall. So this area was kind of designed to be creepy and weird. But not creepy in the sense of scary or, horror game scary, just a bit weird. And I put these barrels in again to make the combat fun. Same with this room. Now we've introduced the man-hacks once, we now have even more of them basically, where if you walk this way, again I placed the barrels and the crates so the player gets to this area and has to think, oh, there's barrels, there's crates and other props, and then the player can move through. I always like adding in ammo that's not too easy. I mean, obviously, as you've seen, there is ammo where you can just walk and pick it up, but here you've actually got to move the basket off and then get the ammo. This, pipe puzzle was taken from the first map of NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut. At the start, when you go up in the elevator and go into a room, there's something like this. But instead of putting the pipe or the valve that you can turn right next to it, I have kind of hidden it away, so the player has to move around, and actually there's a bit of thought that goes into it. So you think, oh, how do I get that? And then they turn it off. I mean, you can actually just get it from here. I mean, I knew that all the time, but most players don't do that. Most players will move around, they won't try that. And then more ducking. One thing I never included in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut was these slopes with barnacles out of sight. And this is something that was done in Half-Life 2 in the early chapters. And it's something I wish I had included in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut, but I didn't. But now I decided when I was going to go back and do this map that I was going to add one of these in. So there's barrels at the top that you can put down and then take them out. And I've given the player a few barrels, so in case they miss one or two, then they can try again. And I made sure to light up the area, because if that light up there wasn't there, it would be very dark. Another one of these repurposed rooms from NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut, but because when it was done before, it was very open, plain, there was not very much in it. I decided to put as many objects in here as possible, like pipes, so you've got to duck under these pipes. You have to either jump over this pipe, or you can go up here, but the fact that there's a pipe player just fills out the room a bit. And obviously these guys were behind here to, because they're not right next to the player, you've actually got to fight them from a distance. So yeah, my aim was to make this room look very awkward. And the barnacles kind of add an extra layer of complexity. One thing I added was the ability to do this, because when you're having a gunfight, having a changing environment's a really good thing. It's something that people like, especially when you're, for instance, if there's like a table in front of you or a desk and you're shooting stuff and the items are coming flying off while you're trying to get rid of the Combine. It just makes it fun and interesting. So that's what I've done here with some of these. So if you had shot them, it would fall off and you get more of a shot on the Metro Cop. This part was here in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut, where you've got two barnacles and you've got the other side, and you have to work out a way to get around them. So you can jump. There we go, did it that time. didn't make it in rehearsal. Or you could use a prop to, you know, distract them. Or you can just shoot them. So giving the player many options of dealing with problems is something that just makes your mod and level very interesting. Now, yeah, these guys are quite buggy. I toned down the amount of man hacks because when you think of man hacks, you think, oh, they're very easy to get rid of and they're not too much of a problem. And individual man hacks are not that difficult to deal with, but when there's a lot of them, they become very, very difficult. And I learned that the hard way by putting in a lot of, man hacks, and people didn't like that too much. I made a structure here because a playtester, when they played it before, back, I think it was this time last year, when they played it in May of 2018, or June, they said, oh, it looks like you can get up there. Now, before you couldn't get up there, but I kind of thought about it and thought, well, maybe that could be the way to go now. Maybe, because I had another problem to solve, which I might speak about later, but I needed the player to kind of be up in that area, so I thought, well, I'll maybe build this structure. Now, when you get to this area, you don't immediately see the way to get up that structure. You maybe see that ladder up there, but I've placed these two lights in the areas. There's like a ladder there and the ladder there to draw the player's attention so that they can see the 2 points of progression, basically, so the player can then go up. There's stuff to find. I think all of this stuff's breakable just for fun. It doesn't always work as well as it could. It's quite glitchy. And you can go out here and pick up the ammo from the other Metro Cops. And there's nothing up there. I initially had a Metro Cop running up and shooting you when you were climbing up this ladder, but it was a bit dodgy as he's kind of behind you and you've kind of cleared this area out. So after the first release of Cosmonaut, I took him out. So it's very much a clear climb to the top. This is the most recently added area. I added this in after some people complained about the vent with a ladder in it. I decided that I was going to change it so that there was no vents, no ladders and vents. So I made this area very quickly. In the recent release, there is bugs with it where you can see it kind of clipping through. And also, I'd rather the way to go was right forward, directly forward there, but it's actually around here, so I've tried to aim the crates towards this side and put these barrels here to stop the player from going up because they can clearly see there's nothing up there. But the reason why I had this structure here is because I needed the player to be higher than the water in this puzzle. So this water puzzle was in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut, but the water rose higher than the door and I had to lock the door behind the player. So one thing I did was ensure that the player got in without me having to close any doors behind them. So that's why there's just a drop here where the player can just drop right in. The water's not high enough here, but it's difficult to do it with this because the water moves up. So I did make it slightly deeper, but maybe not as deep as people would have liked. And the good old barnacle was there to show that the pipe can be picked up. Obviously, we've had a pipe puzzle before in this mod, but I still like the fact the barnacle's there. Okay, this puzzle, I have seen some comments about how I, as a designer, don't know how leaks and these valve puzzles work. I do know how these work. I do know that this place would be flooded if this leak was in real life. But the fact of the matter is, this is a video game, and this leak was done to teach the player that or to kind of draw the player's attention to this area. You know, I know it would be flooded. I know how these things work. But because it's a video game, I have to take certain measures to show the player that the player can do these things. I mean, if I did everything realistically, there would be no mod, there'd be no video game. It would just be walking through a ton of corridors, and it would be very boring. You know, if Cosmonaut was realistic, you wouldn't even survive the crash landing at the beginning. Oh. That's because there's a ledge here, it kind of shoots you up. And this light was placed, again, to draw the player's attention to this side of the room. So the water rises, which doesn't make any sense, but again, it's a mod. And you can just kind of sneak around this guy and jump up. And if you look into that room, you see the pipe swinging. I placed this barrel here because quite a few people who playtested it tried to jump across there, so there was originally no barrel there. And they just saw it and they just tried to jump it, and more often than not, they didn't make it. In fact, I don't think anyone made it. Or they would try and like jump on the side here, which you can't do. So I placed it there to stop players from doing that, and to make them kind of look around and they can see, oh look, it's the same puzzle as before, but I don't need the water leaking out, because the water leaking out down there was to show that, or, you know, to draw the player's attention. As I said, you could see the pipe swinging in this room, and I had a sound cue, but for some reason it stopped swinging after a while. I'd rather it just kept going, you know, so you could always see it. But again, it's just to show that you can interact with it. So you can either hit it, you can pick it up, anything like that. And because we've just done the puzzle, we can do it again. I didn't add a water rising sound, a proper one, because if you tried to do it then, it would continue playing and you couldn't stop it, like the default water rising one. I could have recorded my own and added it in. But by the time I'd, you know, been told about it and all that, I couldn't be bothered to do that. So I just added in the splashing sound. And it does the job, and the player can get across. There we go. Now we're on the train section. The train was put there to, you know, show the player that there are trains, obviously. To warn the player that there is a chance that if they go on the track, there might be a train. I'll show this section. I don't think many people have found it, but it was here in NostalgiaVille Cosmonaut as a nice Easter egg where you can get this gun, and this gun's hidden in most levels. There's more hidden places where you can find this gun, because I like to have reward for those players who look around, and this is one of these rewards. So as I said before, I warned the player that there's trains, and now I throw a train at them. The place kind of shakes when the train goes by, and I made it so that you couldn't do this whole run in a winner. You had to at some point stop on either side, just to give that element of challenge. Now, some people ask me, what is this room? What happened here? The answer is, I don't know. I just put these guys in. There was actually a lot more, and someone told me to take some of them out because it was too much, I think. I don't know what happened here. Again, with the man with the crowbar, I kind of added some Metro Cop masks in and some other props. But I don't know, it was just something here to scare the player and put the fire burning. There's actually a bug where there's no draw. up there, which I only noticed a few days ago. This is one of these rooms, like the other repurposed room, only this was here before, that's not easy to navigate. You can't just run right down this vent area. You actually need to crouch, or jump if you want, or anything like that. These guys sometimes get stuck on the pipes. And I quite like this with the train going underneath and, you know, the manhacks at the top. It's just a nice, quite atmospheric section. I think you can see the train appearing. And I actually had a horn sound that only plays at certain points because you can't hear it from elsewhere, because doing the sound for it's a bit awkward. So that's the end of the second chapter, Waste Management. So just to reiterate, for this episode, the aim was to teach the player the mechanics of the weapons and the enemies, and also make combat as fun and easy as possible this early on. Obviously, in the next couple of chapters, the combat will ramp up and it will become a lot harder, but we'll go over that next episode. So, once again, thank you for watching, and like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.